High along the Appalachian ridges of Kentucky, where the mountains fold into one another like endless waves, there are cabins the world chose to forget. The forest grows thick and dark. The wind cuts sharp along the ridgelines. And the night feels heavier than it should. These cabins were built for survival. For hunters. For families. For those who wanted to live far from everything else. But isolation has a way of changing people. Fires went out in the middle of winter. Footsteps were heard outside with no tracks in the snow. And some cabins were found abandoned, doors open, belongings left behind, as if the occupants stepped out for a moment and never came back. Locals say the ridges remember every scream swallowed by the trees. That the mountains watch. And that the cabins still hold what was never allowed to leave. Hikers report seeing lights deep in the woods where no roads exist. Hearing knocks on cabin doors miles from the nearest trail. And feeling eyes on them from the darkness just beyond the firelight. Tonight, we journey into the most haunted Appalachian Ridge cabins in Kentucky. 20 forgotten places where loneliness, tragedy, and something far older than the mountains still linger. If you were lost on a mountain ridge after dark and saw a single cabin light glowing through the trees, would you walk toward it for safety? Or would you trust the darkness behind you instead? Take a slow breath. The mountains are closer now. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly grateful you are here with me tonight. Before we begin, settle in comfortably. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow and steady. Kentucky's Appalachian region is known for its beauty. Rolling ridges. Endless forests. Quiet hollows hidden between mountains. But it is also a land shaped by hardship and isolation. Cabins were often built high along ridges for hunting, logging, or escaping crowded valleys. Life there was quiet. And brutally lonely. Winters were harsh. Storms came suddenly. And help was often days away. When tragedy struck, there was no one to hear it. Over time, many ridge cabins were abandoned. Some after accidents. Some after violence. And some after events no one could explain. Even today, locals avoid certain ridges after sunset. They speak of voices carried unnaturally far by the wind. Of figures standing between trees, watching silently. Of cabins that feel occupied, even when empty. Tonight, I will guide you through 20 of the most haunted Appalachian Ridge cabins in Kentucky. Each one shaped by fear, solitude, and the dark weight of the mountains themselves. The dark weight of the mountains themselves. Each one shaped by fear, solitude, and the dark weight of the mountains themselves. I will guide you through 20 of the most haunted Appalachian Ridge cabins in Kentucky. Tonight, I will guide you through 20 of the most haunted Appalachian Ridge cabins in Kentucky. Each one shaped by fear, solitude, and the dark weight of the mountains themselves. The dark weight of the mountains themselves. Each one shaped by fear, solitude, and the dark weight of the mountains themselves. I will guide you through 20 of the most haunted Appalachian Ridge cabins in Kentucky. Tonight, I will guide you through 20 of the most haunted Appalachian Ridge cabins in Kentucky. And before we take our first step up the ridge, let me ask you something. If you were hiking alone and found an isolated cabin deep in the mountains just before nightfall, would you knock on the door and ask for shelter? Or would you keep walking and risk the wilderness instead? The cabin at Black Pine Ridge sits deep within dense forest where tall trees crowd together and block much of the sky. The ground there is soft with needles and damp soil, and the air carries the constant scent of pine and cold earth. Even during the day, light struggles to reach the cabin, filtered through layers of branches that sway slowly above it. The hunter built the cabin himself. He chose the location for its isolation and access to game, far from roads and settlements. Neighbors saw him rarely, usually at the change of seasons when he passed through town for supplies. He was known as capable and cautious, someone who respected the woods and understood their rhythms. One winter morning, he left the cabin before dawn. His rifle was gone. His pack was prepared for a short hunt. Nothing suggested he planned to be away long. Snow fell lightly that day, covering tracks almost as soon as they were made. He never returned. At first, no one worried. Days in the woods could stretch longer than planned. But after several nights passed without smoke from the chimney, concern grew. A pot of food sat half-eaten on the table, cold now but untouched since the last bite. The hunter's coat hung by the door. His boots were lined neatly beneath it. Everything suggested interruption. No signs of struggle were found inside. Nothing appeared stolen or disturbed. Outside, snow covered the ground smoothly, hiding whatever tracks might have existed days earlier. Teams followed old trails and marked trees. They searched ravines, frozen streams, and ridgelines. Days passed. Then weeks. No trace of the hunter was ever found. The search was called off. The cabin was left standing, just as it had been discovered. Supplies remained. The door was closed but not locked. Over time, the place faded into silence, claimed slowly by the forest around it. Years passed before the first report. A hiker assumed it was an animal. But the sound was wrong. Too even. Too controlled. Each step landed with careful weight, as if placed deliberately rather than hurried or cautious. The footsteps completed a full circle. They passed behind the cabin, then along the side, then toward the front. When the hiker listened closely, the steps stopped just outside the door. Nothing else happened. No knock. No attempt to enter. Just stillness, followed by the footsteps starting again, continuing their slow circuit. More reports followed over the years. Hunters camping nearby, hikers passing through, and researchers visiting the abandoned cabin all described the same experience. After nightfall, footsteps appeared, moving around the cabin with purpose. They always stopped at the door. Those inside felt the pause clearly, as if the presence stood there, waiting. The air grew heavy in those moments. Breathing sounded louder. Every small movement inside felt exposed. Then the footsteps resumed. They never crossed the threshold. No one ever heard the door handle move. The sound simply passed by, continuing its careful loop. Attempts were made to explain it. Animals were ruled out. Weather offered no answer. Wind did not account for weight shifting step by step around the cabin. Footprints were never found. By morning, the snow around the cabin lay smooth and untouched, as if no one had walked there at all. The ground showed no impressions, no signs of movement. The cabin felt smaller after dark, the space inside drawn inward by the presence circling it. Some visitors reported hearing breathing mixed with the footsteps. Not loud or aggressive, but steady and controlled, matching the rhythm of the steps. The sound always stopped at the door, then vanished before the footsteps moved on. The pattern never changed. The footsteps never approached windows. They never wandered off. They never entered. They remained bound to the cabina's perimeter, repeating the same route night after night. Locals have their theories. Some believe the hunter returned to the cabin after his final hunt, but not in a way that could be seen. They say the warmth of the fire and the untouched meal suggest he was close, interrupted by something outside. Others believe the footsteps belong to what followed him home. They point to the careful circling, the pause at the door, the refusal to enter. As if something learned the boundary and respects it, even now. The forest around Black Pine Ridge remains quiet. Birds avoid the immediate area after sunset. Wind seems to drop suddenly near the cabin, leaving the air unnaturally still. Sound carries farther there, footsteps and whispers traveling farther than expected. No one has stayed inside the cabin for more than one night. Those who try leave before dawn, unsettled and exhausted. Sleep comes in fragments, broken by the slow rhythm of steps outside and the heavy silence at the door. The cabin itself has not decayed as expected. Though weathered, it stands firm. The roof holds. The door remains straight in its frame. It feels preserved, as though maintained by attention rather than repair. By daylight, the place looks ordinary again. Sunlight reaches the clearing. Snow melts evenly. The forest resumes its usual sounds. Nothing suggests what happens after dark. But night always returns. And when it does, footsteps circle the cabin once more. Slow. Careful. Familiar. The hunter never came back from the woods. But something still walks the boundary of his last shelter, night after night, circling patiently, as if waiting for the door to open, or for permission that will never come. Croa's backbone cabin sits alone on a narrow ridge trail where the land drops steeply on either side. The path leading to it is thin and uneven, worn by decades of boots and weather rather than constant use. The cabin was built as a shelter for early hikers and rangers. It is small, sturdy, and plainly constructed, with thick wooden walls and a single door facing the trail. For years, hikers welcomed the sight of it. After long climbs and exposed stretches of trail, the cabin promised shelter and quiet. People stopped briefly, sometimes stepping inside, sometimes just resting nearby before continuing on. No one stayed long. The ridge was not a place meant for lingering. Then the knocking began. The first reports were easy to dismiss. Hikers claimed they heard knocking sounds coming from inside the cabin while passing by. At first, it was assumed someone else had arrived ahead of them, perhaps another traveler seeking rest. But when the door was opened, the cabin was always empty. The knocking followed a specific pattern. It was slow and deliberate, each sound spaced evenly apart. The noise carried clearly through the thin mountain air, distinct from the creaking of wood or the shifting of trees. It sounded intentional, as if someone inside was announcing their presence without urgency. Hikers described the same experience again and again. They would approach the cabin and hear the knocking from within. 3 or 4 firm taps, then a pause. The sound echoed softly against the surrounding rock, easy to hear even from several steps away. Instinct often took over. Believing someone was inside, hikers knocked back on the door or wall, answering in kind. The knocking stopped completely. Not a fade. Not a final tap. Just silence. Opening the door revealed nothing. The cabin interior remained unchanged. A small table. A bench. Hooks along the wall. Dust settled evenly across surfaces, undisturbed. No sign of anyone entering or leaving. The silence felt heavier than before. Those who stood inside described a pressure in the air, as if sound itself had been pulled away. Outside, wind continued to move through the trees, but within the cabin, everything felt paused. Some hikers tested the pattern. They waited without knocking back. In those cases, the knocking continued, steady and patient, never growing louder or faster. It did not stop until the hiker either knocked in response or moved away from the cabin entirely. No one ever heard the knocking resume after answering. Once acknowledged, the sound never returned during that visit. Even staying nearby or re-entering the cabin produced no further noise. The experience spread by word of mouth. Trail guides began mentioning it quietly. Local hikers warned newcomers not to knock back if they heard the sound. Those who ignored the advice did not report harm, but they described a lasting unease that followed them down the trail. At night, the cabin feels different. The ridge grows quiet after sunset, the kind of silence broken only by wind and distant wildlife. Those who camp nearby report hearing the knocking more clearly then, each sound traveling farther in the cold air. At night, the knocking sounds closer. Even when heard from outside the cabin, it feels as if it comes from just behind the wall, right at ear level. Some describe the impression of someone standing inside, waiting patiently for acknowledgement. No lights are ever seen. The cabin remains dark. No shadows move within. No reflections appear in the small window. The knocking exists alone, separate from any visible source. Attempts to record the sound have had mixed results. Some audio devices capture faint tapping, barely distinguishable from background noise. Others record nothing at all. Those present insist the sound was clear and unmistakable at the time. Investigations found no natural explanation. There are no loose branches striking the cabin. No animals capable of producing such controlled rhythm. The structure is solid, with no internal movement that would account for the sound. The location adds to the mystery. Crow's Backbone Cabin sits at a point where the ridge narrows, forcing the trail into a single line. Wind behaves unpredictably there, sometimes moving straight up the slope rather than across it. Sound carries in odd ways, yet never in patterns so precise. Local stories offer speculation but no answers. Some suggest the knocking is a signal, not meant to frighten but to confirm presence. Others believe it is a boundary, a way of marking the cabin as occupied by something unseen. These ideas are shared without conviction, more as comfort than explanation. Those who choose not to knock back describe a different feeling. The knocking continues as they pass, following their movement along the wall until they step far enough away. The sound does not pursue beyond the cabin. It stays within its boundaries, contained and patient. The cabin itself shows no signs of change. Weathered but intact, it stands as it always has. No damage appears where knocking is heard. No marks form on the wood. The sound leaves no physical trace. Not immediately, but later, as they move farther along the trail. A faint tapping sound follows briefly, then fades. Others report nothing beyond the initial encounter. Crow's Backbone Cabin remains open. There are no warnings posted. No barriers prevent entry. Yet many choose not to step inside anymore. They pause at a distance, listening. If the knocking begins, they move on quietly, resisting the urge to respond. Those who knock back still leave unharmed, but rarely return. The ridge trail stretches on beyond the cabin, narrow and exposed. Wind moves steadily. Trees bend and settle. The cabin stands alone, waiting. Inside, nothing moves. Yet when footsteps approach, and the air grows still, the slow, deliberate knocking sometimes begins again. Patient and unchanging, as if someone inside has learned to wait for an answer, and knows exactly when to stop asking. The hollow wind cabin stands alone on a narrow ridge where the land drops away on both sides. Trees grow twisted and low there, shaped by years of unrelenting gusts that never seem to rest. Even on clear days, the air moves with purpose, sliding along the ground and striking the cabin from all directions. The cabin was built for isolation. It served as a temporary shelter for workers who once surveyed the surrounding land. The structure was simple, reinforced against weather but never meant to last generations. Its position was chosen for visibility, not comfort, and wind was considered an inconvenience rather than a threat. From the beginning, the cabin was loud. Boards creaked constantly. Loose metal hummed and rattled. The wind pushed through gaps in the walls and under the door, producing low tones that rose and fell without rhythm. Those who stayed there learned to sleep through noise, accepting it as part of the place. Then the voices were noticed. At first, they were dismissed as imagination. The wind carried strange patterns, and exhaustion can shape sound into meaning. But multiple visitors described the same experience. Amid the constant gusts, words emerged briefly and clearly, then dissolved back into noise. The sound came close, as if someone leaned in to speak directly into the ear. The voice was soft and unforced, neither urgent nor threatening. Sometimes familiar, sometimes not, then faded as the wind shifted. Laughter followed. Quiet and brief, carried on the same current. It never sounded distant. The laughter always seemed nearby, just beyond sight, as if someone stood just outside the cabin walls, amused but unseen. People turned toward the sound, expecting to see someone at the door or window. Stepping outside revealed only empty ground and bending trees. The wind continued uninterrupted, carrying nothing recognizable once attention shifted. The voices did not respond to calls. Shouting into the wind produced only echo and distortion. Yet moments later, a whisper would return from a different direction, close again, intimate in proximity despite the open air. The longer someone remained, the easier it became to distinguish voices from the wind. Patterns emerged. The names spoken were not random. Visitors reported hearing names connected to memory. Childhood friends. Relatives. Occasionally their own name, spoken clearly enough to stop them mid-movement. Those who heard their own name described a sudden chill, followed by the sense that someone stood directly behind them. Turning around revealed nothing. The interior of the cabin remained unchanged. Shadows did not move independently. The sound did not come from a fixed point. It traveled with the air itself, impossible to track or corner. Some heard laughter more than voices. It was never loud. It never escalated. The laughter carried a tone of familiarity, not mockery or joy, but something in between. Sounded like recognition, as if the wind acknowledged those who listened too closely. Local residents avoid the ridge. They speak of the cabin as unsettled, not dangerous but invasive. The wind there does not merely pass through. It interacts, shaping itself around attention and memory. Those who camp nearby report restless sleep. Dreams feature voices calling softly from just out of view. Waking brings the immediate sound of wind striking the cabin walls, blending dream and reality into something difficult to separate. Recordings taken inside the cabin capture unusual audio. Microphones pick up layered wind noise, but playback sometimes reveals faint tonal changes that resemble speech. These moments are inconsistent and often disputed, yet listeners frequently agree on hearing fragments of names when prompted to listen closely. The phenomenon does not require storms. Even on mild days, the wind at the ridge remains active. Gusts rise suddenly, circle the cabin, then depart. The voices appear during these shifts, riding the movement as if bound to it rather than originating from a fixed source. Standing outside produces a stronger effect. With no walls to block sound, the whispers feel closer. The wind moves around the body, brushing against ears and neck, carrying voices that seem to pass directly through the listener rather than around them. Some visitors describe a growing urge to respond. Not aloud, but internally. Thoughts drift toward the names heard. Memories surface uninvited. Attention narrows until the surrounding landscape feels distant, secondary to the sound moving through the air. Leaving the ridge breaks the effect. As elevation drops, the wind loses intensity. The whispers fade completely. Voices do not follow beyond the ridge line. The transition is abrupt enough to feel unnatural, as if crossing an invisible boundary. The cabin itself remains intact but unused. Weather has stripped paint and warped wood. The door swings freely. Inside, dust gathers undisturbed. The door swings freely. Inside, dust gathers undisturbed. The wind never stops. It strikes the cabin day and night, finding every gap and seam. It carries sound that feels deliberate, shaped by more than chance. The voices never linger long enough to be confronted, but they always sound close. Those who return often report the same names repeated. The whispers do not change with time. They feel personal, tailored to the listener rather than the place. Two people standing together may hear different things, each convinced the sound was meant for them alone. No one has identified a source. The ridge has been surveyed. The cabin inspected. No acoustic features fully explain the clarity or proximity of the voices. Wind behavior alone cannot account for the specificity of the sounds described. The hollow wind cabin does not threaten. It does not chase visitors away or trap them. It simply speaks when the wind allows, threading words into moving air, then taking them back just as quickly. The danger, if it exists, lies in listening too long. In letting the wind shape attention and draw memory closer than intended. In mistaking proximity for presence. Those who leave quickly remember the experience as unsettling but brief. Those who stay begin to anticipate the whispers, waiting for the moment when the wind shifts just right and a name slips through again. Always close. Always carried on breathless air. At the hollow wind cabin, the wind does not merely pass through the landscape. It speaks. It laughs softly. And it never sounds far away. Laurel Spine Ridge rises above the surrounding forest in a long, narrow arc, its rocky back cutting through trees that grow thinner and more twisted with elevation. The air there is cooler year-round, carrying the sharp scent of pine and stone. Even in daylight, the ridge feels subdued, as if sound does not fully belong. Near the highest point of the ridge, the remains of a family cabin still stand. What is left is skeletal. Charred beams rise from a rectangle of blackened earth, their surfaces cracked and flaking, preserved by cold and altitude rather than care. Nails remain embedded in the wood, rusted in place. No walls survived. No roof. Only the frame, frozen mid-collapse, outlines where a home once stood. The fire happened decades ago. Records say the cabin burned during an unusually cold season, when snow should have prevented flames from spreading so quickly. Neighbors reported seeing the glow from miles away, an unnatural brightness against the dark ridge. By the time help arrived, the structure was already gone. The cause was never confirmed. After the fire, no one rebuilt. The land was left untouched, partly out of respect, partly because those who visited afterward described an unease that could not be explained. The ridge itself seemed altered, its silence heavier than before. During the day, Laurel Spine Ridge appears empty. The forest moves gently with the wind. Birds pass through without lingering. Sunlight filters unevenly between branches, rarely reaching the ground near the ruins. The charred beams cast long shadows even at noon, dark lines that feel fixed in place. At night, the ridge changes. Cold settles quickly there, dropping temperatures well below the surrounding forest. Breath becomes visible. This is when the figures appear. They form slowly, emerging from the darker pockets between trees. At first, they look like drifting mist, pale and thin, moving against the natural flow of air. As they gather, their shapes become more defined. They are never solid. Edges blur and reform constantly, as if struggling to hold shape. Arms appear and fade. Heads tilt slightly, then dissolve into curling wisps. The figures move with quiet intention, gliding between trunks and over roots without disturbing leaves or snow. They do not approach the ruins directly. Instead, they circle the area, tracing paths that suggest familiarity. Some drift close to the charred beams, pausing there briefly before moving on. Others wander farther into the trees, then return, as if tethered to the site. The smoke does not rise. It stays low, hugging the ground and mid-level air, unaffected by wind. Even strong gusts pass through the ridge without scattering the figures. They continue their slow movement, independent of the environment around them. Witnesses describe an overwhelming stillness during these moments. Sound fades. The forest seems to hold its breath. The crunch of snow beneath boots feels muted, distant, as if happening somewhere else. They make no sound beyond the faintest whisper of movement, like smoke drawn gently through a narrow space. Yet those who see them often report hearing something internally. Not voices, but impressions. A sense of waiting. Of searching. Some feel watched. Not with hostility, but with quiet attention. The feeling is strongest near the remains of the cabin, where the air grows noticeably colder. Standing too close to the beams produces a sharp chill that cuts through layers of clothing, accompanied by a tightness in the chest. Most visitors do not stay long. Those who linger report physical effects. Shivering that does not stop after leaving the ridge. Lingering scent of smoke on clothing, even when no fire was present. Dreams filled with drifting shapes and cold air. Attempts to document the phenomenon have had limited success. Cameras capture faint distortions, areas where darkness moves unnaturally between trees. Thermal imaging shows cooler patches that shift without clear cause. Smoke detectors sometimes trigger without smoke. Other times, nothing is recorded at all. The figures appear most often on the coldest nights. Especially when the air is still and clouds block moonlight. On those nights, Laurel Spine Ridge becomes nearly invisible from below. The smoke figures are easier to see then, pale against the black forest. Local stories differ in interpretation. Some believe the figures are remnants of the fire itself, shaped by memory and cold air. According to this belief, the ridge absorbed the event, holding on to the smoke that never fully dispersed. Others think the figures represent those who once lived in the cabin, returning not as bodies, but as the last thing the fire left behind. There are also those who believe the ridge is simply replaying motion. That the smoke figures are not aware, not present in any meaningful sense, but echoes formed when conditions align perfectly. Cold air, low pressure, and a place marked by sudden loss. Regardless of explanation, one detail remains consistent. The figures never leave the ridge. They do not descend into the lower forest. They do not cross the narrow trail that leads upward. They remain bound to Laurel Spine Ridge, moving only within its tree line and ruins. At dawn, they fade. As the first light reaches the ridge, the smoke thins and disperses. Shapes lose cohesion, unraveling into ordinary mist before disappearing entirely. The forest resumes its quiet movement. Birds return cautiously. The charred beams stand alone once more. By day, the site looks abandoned but harmless. Yet those who have seen the figures say the ridge feels different afterward. As if something has been acknowledged. As if the place knows it was observed. Hikers passing through the area are advised not to camp near the ruins. Those who do often report restless nights, waking to the sensation of cold air moving across their faces. Some describe seeing smoke drift just beyond their tents, never entering, never fully leaving. Laurel Spine Ridge remains unmarked. No signs warn visitors. No barriers protect the site. The forest keeps its silence, allowing the ridge to remain as it has for decades. A place where fire ended something suddenly. A place where smoke never fully cleared. And on cold nights, when the air grows heavy and still. When the air grows heavy and still, figures made of drifting smoke rise quietly. Figures made of drifting smoke rise quietly between the trees, moving through the remains of a home that burned long ago. Bound to the ridge that remembers them, waiting in silence where warmth once lived. Deadfall Cabin once stood on a narrow ridge where tall trees crowded close, their roots gripping shallow soil and stone. The forest there was dense and old, shaped by decades of storms and quiet seasons. Wind moved differently along the ridge, funneled and amplified by the slope, making the trees creak even on calm days. The cabin was built to endure. Its logs were thick, its roof steep, designed to shed snow and rain. The owner chose the site for solitude and shelter, believing the trees would break the wind and offer protection. For years, the cabin held firm through winter after winter, its presence small but stubborn against the forest. Then the storm came. It arrived suddenly, driven by powerful wind and heavy rain that turned soil to slurry and loosened roots already strained by age. Trees swayed violently, trunks bending farther than they ever had before. The ridge groaned as the forest shifted under pressure. One tree fell. The sound carried across the hills, sharp cracks followed by deep, rolling impacts as massive trunks struck the ground. In the chaos, several trees collapsed at once, crashing down onto the cabin with unstoppable force. By morning, Deadfall Cabin was gone. What remained was a tangle of splintered wood and broken logs pinned beneath fallen trees. The roof had caved in completely. Walls were flattened. The structure had not failed on its own, but it had not survived the weight brought down upon it. No one was inside at the time. The site was cleared just enough to confirm that. Then it was left alone, considered unsafe and too remote to salvage. The forest closed in around the wreckage, moss and debris slowly reclaiming what the storm had scattered. Weeks passed. The ridge returned to quiet. Wind softened. Birds returned. The storm became another story told about the power of weather and the risks of building too deep in the woods. Then the sound began. Hikers moving along trails below the ridge reported hearing wood splitting overhead long after the storm had passed. The sound was sharp and sudden, like a tree trunk cracking under pressure. It was assumed to be delayed damage. Trees weakened by the storm could still fall. Cracks might form days later as wood dried and shifted. But searches of the ridge revealed no new fallen trees, no fresh breaks, no movement. Yet the sound continued. It occurred on calm days, when no wind stirred the canopy. It happened at night, when the forest was still and sound carried farther. The splitting echoed from the same area every time, near the remains of Deadfall Cabin. The sound followed a pattern. It began with a low strain, barely audible, like pressure building inside wood. Then came the sharp crack, loud and unmistakable, followed by a dull settling sound. The sequence repeated irregularly, sometimes once a night, sometimes several times in an hour. Those who listened closely noticed something unsettling. The sound did not come from the trees. It came from below them. The echo carried upward, as though the splitting occurred beneath the forest floor or within the debris itself. Standing near the site produced a sensation of compression, as if the ground tightened briefly before relaxing again. No movement accompanied the sound. Branches did not shake. Leaves did not fall. The trees remained standing, unchanged. Only the noise suggested force at work. Investigators examined the wreckage. They found no signs of continued collapse. The fallen trees lay still, their weight fully settled. The remains of the cabin showed no new fractures. Nothing explained the repeated sound of splitting wood. Equipment recorded the noise clearly. Microphones captured sharp, clean cracks, identical in tone each time. Yet cameras showed nothing moving. The sound existed without visible cause. Those who stayed near the ridge after dark reported a growing sense of unease. The air felt heavy. Breathing seemed louder. Sound behaved oddly, echoes lingering longer than expected. Locals shared their interpretations quietly. They believed the ridge remembered the moment of collapse. That the force of trees crushing wood had pressed itself into the place, repeating when conditions were right. Others believed the cabin itself resisted. They said the structure had held for years, refusing to fail until overwhelmed. Even now, they believed, it continued to push back, straining against weight that no longer moved. The sound always echoed from the same direction. It traced the outline of the former cabin, as if marking beams and walls that no longer stood. Some claimed they could hear multiple cracks in sequence, like timbers giving way one by one. Those who tried reported restless sleep, broken by sudden sharp cracks that felt closer than they should have been. Waking moments later revealed nothing but darkness and still trees. Deer tracks circled wide around it. Sunlight filtered through branches. The sound returned again and again. It echoed on clear nights and cloudy ones. It occurred in summer heat and winter cold. Time did not weaken it. Distance did not soften it. Those who listened long enough began to anticipate it. A pause would settle over the forest, followed by the familiar strain, then the crack that split the silence cleanly. The moment passed quickly, leaving behind a lingering echo and a sense that something had just been forced beyond its limit. Deadfall Cabin is now marked only on old maps. Trails bypassed the ridge. Visitors are warned away from the unstable ground. The forest appears to have healed around the wreckage, hiding most of the damage. But the ridge has not forgotten. Long after the storm has passed, long after the last tree has fallen, the sound of wood splitting still echoes there. The trees stand. The cabin lies broken. And somewhere beneath the quiet ridge, the sound of pressure and failure continues, reminding anyone who hears it that some places do not let go of the moment they were undone, and that destruction, once impressed deeply enough, can continue to speak long after everything else has gone still. The cabin at Owl Cry Ridge stands alone near the highest point of a narrow rise where the forest thins and the ground turns rocky. The trail leading to it is faint, used only by experienced hikers who know where to look. Trees grow close together there, their branches forming a loose canopy that blocks much of the light even during midday. The silence is the first thing people notice. As hikers approach the ridge, the usual sounds of the forest fade away. Insects stop buzzing. Birds fall quiet. Even the wind seems to lose its voice, moving the leaves without producing sound. The absence is so complete that it feels intentional, as if the land itself is holding its breath. The cabin sits at the center of that quiet. It is a simple structure, built from rough timber and stone, with a low roof and a single window facing the trail. Records show it was used infrequently, then not at all. No one remembers when the silence began. Local guides say the area was once ordinary, filled with the sounds of wildlife and wind. Over time, visitors began to comment on the stillness near the ridge. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence, a trick of elevation or weather. But the quiet never lifted. Those who step into the clearing around the cabin report an immediate change. Sound feels muffled, as though wrapped in fabric. Footsteps fall dull and soft. Voices do not carry far, even when raised. The cabin door often stands slightly open. Inside, the air feels heavier. Dust rests undisturbed on surfaces. There are no signs of recent use. No food. No bedding. Nothing that suggests someone has stayed there in years. The silence deepens indoors. Outside, at least the movement of leaves can be seen. Inside the cabin, even that connection feels cut off. The world narrows to the sound of Oni's own breathing, loud and intrusive in the absence of everything else. Then another sound becomes noticeable. It is breathing that does not match the Visitora's rhythm. At first, it is easy to dismiss. Stress alters perception. Heightened awareness fills gaps where sound should be. But those who remain still hear it clearly, slow and steady, coming from somewhere nearby. The breathing is not labored. It does not sound strained or aggressive. It is calm, controlled, and close. Sometimes it seems to come from just behind. The cabin remains empty. The sound does not grow louder or softer with movement. The sound maintains a steady presence, separate from the listener. No insects resume their calls. The ridge holds its quiet, amplifying the awareness of that single additional breath. Those who leave the cabin report immediate relief. The moment they step beyond the clearing, sound begins to return. Insects buzz. Leaves rustle audibly. The forest resumes its normal rhythm. Looking back toward the ridge, the silence remains. It settles around the cabin like a boundary, distinct and contained. Those who cross it again feel the same pressure, the same unnatural stillness. No physical evidence explains the phenomenon. Sound meters show no anomalies. Air movement remains normal. Wildlife cameras placed near the ridge capture animals approaching the boundary, then turning away without explanation. No animals are ever seen within the silent zone. Tracks stop at its edge. Birds do not land in the trees above the cabin. Even insects avoid the area, leaving the clearing untouched by life. Some visitors report the breathing begins before they enter the cabin. They hear it faintly while standing outside, synchronized just enough to cause doubt. Inside, it becomes unmistakable. The breathing never speaks. It simply exists, sharing the space, reminding visitors they are not alone in the silence. Those who stay too long describe a growing discomfort. Not fear exactly, but vulnerability. The awareness of Oni's own body becomes heightened. Heartbeat feels louder. Movements feel exaggerated. The other breathing remains steady, unaffected by reaction. No one has reported being touched. The presence never crosses that boundary. It does not follow when visitors leave. It does not respond when spoken to or acknowledged. Attempts to record the sound have failed. Audio devices capture only silence and the Visitora's own breathing. Local stories have developed quietly. Some believe the ridge absorbs sound rather than reflecting it, trapping something that requires silence to exist. Others believe the cabin sits on a natural boundary, where different spaces overlap briefly. No explanation has gained consensus. What remains consistent is the experience. Silence. Absence. Breathing that does not belong to the listener. Most hikers do not stay long. They pause, feel the stillness, then move on. Those who spend time inside the cabin often leave shaken, unable to fully explain why the encounter felt so personal. The ridge offers no warning. There are no signs. No barriers. The trail remains open, unmarked. Guides mention Owl Cry Ridge only in passing. Those who know, know. They advise listening carefully, trusting instinct, and leaving if the silence feels too complete. At dusk, the ridge becomes even quieter. Light fades quickly there. Shadows deepen. The cabin remains unchanged. Wood weathers. Stone holds firm. Dust gathers. Nothing suggests activity. Nothing suggests occupancy. And yet, the sound persists. Only the sound of breathing that is not your own, steady and patient, filling the silence where the forest should be, reminding anyone who enters Owl Cry Ridge that some places are quiet not because nothing is there, but because something has learned how to listen. Pine Knot Cabin sits deep within a stretch of forest where the trees grow close and the ground stays cool even in summer. The cabin was built as a way station for hunters and travelers, a simple structure meant to offer warmth and shelter before the next long stretch of trail. Its logs were cut from nearby pines, their knots dark and tight, giving the cabin its name. For many years, Pine Knot Cabin served its purpose well. People came and went without incident. Lantern light often glowed through the small windows at night, marking the cabin as a safe point in an otherwise shadowed landscape. Smoke from the chimney rose straight into the canopy, and the sound of voices carried softly between trees. The first disappearance was treated as an accident. A lone hiker failed to return from a routine trip and was last seen heading toward the cabin at dusk. Search parties found no sign of struggle. Footprints faded near the tree line, and the trail beyond showed nothing unusual. The cabin stood empty, its door closed, its interior undisturbed. Then it happened again. Another traveler vanished under similar circumstances, followed weeks later by a pair of hunters who never made it back to camp. Each time, the trail led toward Pine Knot Cabin. Each time, the evidence stopped just short of the clearing. Fear grew quietly. People avoided the area but did not abandon it immediately. The forest was familiar, and the cabin had long been trusted. Some believed the disappearances were coincidences, the result of wildlife or missteps in rough terrain. What unsettled investigators most was what they found at night. During searches that extended past sunset, teams reported seeing a faint lantern glow inside the cabin. The light was steady and warm, clearly visible through the small windows. It suggested someone was inside, waiting. Approaching the cabin changed everything. Those who walked closer heard no movement. No footsteps. No voices. Knocking on the door produced no response. The lantern light continued to glow until the moment someone touched the door handle. Then it vanished. The interior went dark instantly, leaving only moonlight and shadow. Opening the door revealed an empty cabin. The lantern was cold, unlit, and resting exactly where it should be, as if it had never been burning at all. These sightings became frequent. Anyone passing near Pine Knot Cabin after dark reported the same thing. Light in the windows. A sense of occupancy. Silence when approached. Darkness the moment contact was made. Eventually, the cabin was officially abandoned. Supplies were removed. The trail was rerouted. Warnings were posted, though few explained the reason clearly. The forest reclaimed the clearing slowly. But the structure itself remained intact, preserved by dry air and shade. Years later, curiosity brought visitors back. Explorers hiking through the region found the cabin unchanged. During the day, it appeared empty and harmless. Dust lay undisturbed. No signs of recent use appeared inside. The windows reflected only trees and sky. Night told a different story. As darkness settled, the lantern glow returned. It was never bright, but always visible, a soft amber light that suggested someone sitting quietly inside. From a distance, it felt welcoming, almost comforting, a reminder of shelter in a vast forest. Those who approached felt watched. Not by sight, but by presence. The clearing grew quiet as they drew near. Knocking never worked. No matter how loud or persistent, there was no response. Calling out names echoed back without answer. The light remained steady until someone stepped onto the porch. Always at the same moment. Always without flicker or delay. Darkness replaced warmth, and the cabin returned to its empty state. Some visitors tried waiting. They stood at a distance, watching the windows for hours. The light stayed on as long as no one approached. The moment someone moved closer, even slightly, it vanished again. No one has seen the light turn on. It is never observed igniting or being carried. The moment someone moved closer, even slightly, it vanished again. Local belief suggests the cabin learned how to wait. That the disappearances left something unresolved, something tied to expectation. Travelers once arrived at Pine Knot Cabin seeking shelter. Those who vanished may have reached it, or believed they did. The light represents that final moment of hope, repeating without completion. Others believe the light serves as a signal. Not to guide people safely, but to draw them close enough to the forest edge where direction becomes uncertain. The moment someone commits to entering, the signal withdraws, leaving them alone in the dark. Those who linger too long describe subtle effects. Time feels stretched. The forest seems denser. Sounds arrive late or not at all. Some report difficulty remembering how long they have been standing there, watching the light. Sleep near the area is restless. Campers who ignore warnings and stay nearby describe dreams of knocking on doors that never open. Of light fading just as warmth is reached. Waking brings immediate awareness of trees crowding closer than before. Despite this, the cabin does not appear hostile. There are no sudden movements, no threatening sounds. The experience is quiet and restrained. The danger lies in suggestion rather than force. Daylight erases the illusion. In the morning, Pine Knot Cabin looks abandoned and inert. Sunlight fills the clearing. The windows are dark. The forest resumes its normal sounds. They remember how real it looked. How close it felt. How natural it seemed to approach, to expect someone inside to answer. Pine Knot Cabin still stands, weathered but upright. No one claims it anymore. No trail officially leads to it. Yet the lantern light continues to appear, night after night, unchanged by time or absence. It glows faintly through the windows. It suggests warmth, safety, and company. And when someone comes close enough to ask for entry, no one answers the door. Split Rock Ridge rises sharply from the surrounding forest, a jagged spine of stone that dominates the landscape for miles. The formation is split cleanly down the center, as if struck by immense force long ago, creating a narrow vertical divide that never fully closes. Wind passes through the gap with a low, steady tone, giving the ridge a voice that changes with the weather. It was built close to the rock, close enough that the stone looms over the roof and casts shade across the clearing for most of the day. The cabin is modest, constructed of dark timber and reinforced with stone pulled directly from the ridge itself. It was meant as a retreat, a place of quiet, chosen for its isolation and the sense of permanence offered by the rock beside it. For many years, nothing unusual was reported. The cabin changed hands a few times, always owned by people who wanted distance from towns and roads. They spoke of deep silence, of long nights broken only by wind and wildlife. The ridge was considered imposing, but protective, a constant presence rather than a threat. That perception shifted slowly. Visitors began noticing shadows on the rock face that did not match the movement of the sun or moon. At first, they were dismissed as tricks of light caused by uneven stone and passing clouds. But the shadows began to move with intention. They stretched upward against the natural fall of light. They paused where no obstruction existed. They slid across the rock face smoothly, forming outlines that felt deliberate rather than accidental. The shapes were almost human. Not detailed. Not detailed. Not complete. Broad shoulders suggested by darker patches. Narrow waists formed by converging lines of shadow. Limbs implied by elongated streaks that bent at places where joints might be. The figures never appeared all at once. They assembled gradually, as if the rock itself was deciding how much to reveal. A shadow would form near the base, then extend upward, gaining shape as it climbed. Other times, the outline appeared near the split, emerging from the darkness within the stone. They never left the rock face. No shadow crossed onto the ground or the cabin walls. They remained confined to the stone, moving along its surface with steady, controlled motion. When they reached the edge of the formation, they thinned and faded rather than spilling over. Those who stayed in the cabin at night reported heightened activity. Moonlight intensified the effect, casting pale illumination across the ridge that sharpened the contrast between light and dark. On clear nights, the shadows became more defined, moving slowly but persistently, as if pacing. Cloud cover did not stop them. Even on nights when the sky was fully overcast, faint outlines appeared, darker than the surrounding stone. They shifted subtly, visible not by contrast with light, but by their refusal to blend in. Witnesses describe a sense of being observed. Standing in the clearing beneath the ridge produces a feeling of attention, as though the stone is aware of movement below. The sensation does not feel hostile. It feels focused, patient, and constant. The shadows do not react to sound. Shouting, clapping, and calling out produce no change. The figures do not turn or respond. They gather near the central divide, slipping in and out of the darkness within the rock. The gap is deep enough that light rarely reaches its interior, creating a vertical corridor of shadow. Attempts to illuminate the ridge directly have mixed results. Powerful lights flatten the shadows briefly, reducing them to faint discolorations. As soon as the light is removed, the shapes return, reassembling with unsettling speed, as if waiting for the interruption to end. Cameras struggle to capture the phenomenon. Photographs show irregular dark areas that appear ordinary when viewed later. Video footage sometimes reveals movement, but without the clarity seen by the human eye. The shapes appear incomplete on screen, lacking the almost human suggestion that witnesses describe. Researchers have proposed explanations. They point to pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. They cite the complex geometry of the rock face and the way shadows can appear to move as light shifts imperceptibly. These explanations account for some effects, but not all. The movement does not always align with changes in light. On several recorded occasions, shadows have shifted in opposite directions simultaneously. Some have appeared to slow or pause while others continued, creating the impression of multiple figures acting independently. Local stories offer different interpretations. Some say the ridge remembers those who once traveled through the area, using the stone as a landmark long before the cabin existed. According to these stories, the rock absorbed countless silhouettes over generations, now replaying fragments of human presence. Others believe the split itself is responsible. They say the fracture in the stone created a boundary, a place where light and darkness overlap imperfectly. The shadows, they believe, are not entities, but the result of imbalance, shapes formed where something should align but does not. There are also those who claim the cabin should never have been built so close. They argue that the rock was never meant to be observed continuously. That prolonged attention encourages the shadows to organize, to take form. According to this belief, the figures appeared only after the cabin became occupied regularly. Over time, visits to the cabin became shorter. People reported restless nights, waking with the feeling that movement continued even with eyes closed. Some described dreaming of standing against stone, unable to turn away, while shadows passed slowly behind them. No one has reported being harmed. The shadows do not reach out. They do not leave the ridge. They do not approach the cabin directly. Their presence is unsettling precisely because it remains contained and controlled. As if bound by rules no one understands. Today, Split Rock Ridge Cabin is rarely used. The structure still stands, weathered but intact. The clearing remains open, though grass grows taller than it once did. The ridge looms unchanged, its split as sharp and dark as ever. Visitors who pass through during the day often see nothing unusual. The rock looks inert. The shadows behave normally. The place feels quiet, even peaceful. But those who stay until dusk know the difference. As light fades and the ridge absorbs the last of the sun, the shadows begin to shift again. Slowly at first. Then with greater confidence. Shapes stretch across the stone, assembling into outlines that feel almost familiar. Almost human. They move along the rock face without sound. Without leaving their surface. As if the stone itself is remembering how to hold a form it once observed countless times. Split Rock Ridge does not explain itself. It does not warn or invite. It simply stands, split and watching, allowing its shadows to move as they always have. Shaping figures out of darkness that never fully become what they resemble. Yet remain impossible to ignore once they appear. And beside it, the cabin waits quietly. A witness to the slow movement of shadow across stone. Where light and absence meet and briefly suggest something that should not be there. But always is. Hemlock Ridge rises quietly above the surrounding forest, its slopes thick with dark evergreens that block much of the light even at midday. The air there is cool and still, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Trails wind carefully through the trees, leading hikers toward a clearing near the top where an old cabin stands. The cabin has been empty for many years. Its wood has weathered to a pale gray. The roof sags slightly, but the structure remains intact, as if maintained by time rather than hands. A small porch faces the forest, its boards worn smooth by countless seasons of rain and snow. Most hikers pass without stopping. The cabin is not marked as a destination. It appears suddenly between the trees, then fades behind them again as the trail continues. During the day, it feels unremarkable, another forgotten structure in the wilderness. That changes in the late afternoon. As the sun lowers, light shifts across Hemlock Ridge in subtle ways. Shadows lengthen. It is during this time that hikers begin to notice her. A woman stands on the porch. She appears without warning, already in place when noticed. She stands near the center of the porch, facing outward toward the trees. Her posture is straight, her arms resting naturally at her sides. She never moves. From a distance, she looks solid and unmistakably human. Her clothing appears simple and old-fashioned, muted in color, blending with the cabin and forest behind her. Hikers often stop, confused. They assume she is another visitor, perhaps a caretaker or someone resting quietly. Some wave or call out, expecting acknowledgement. She never responds. She does not turn her head. She does not shift her weight. Her gaze remains fixed forward, as if focused on something far beyond the trees. Those who watch closely notice something unsettling. Her stillness is complete. No rise and fall of breath. No adjustment against the changing light. Even long moments pass without the slightest motion. Curiosity usually gives way to concern. Hikers approach the cabin carefully, stepping off the trail and moving through fallen needles toward the porch. With each step closer, the sense of presence grows stronger, accompanied by a deep quiet that settles over the clearing. The forest seems to pause. Birdsong fades. Wind softens. Footsteps sound louder than they should, each crunch of ground echoing faintly. The woman remains. She stands exactly as before, unchanged by approach. Her expression is calm, unreadable, neither welcoming nor hostile. Her eyes appear open, but distant, focused on nothing nearby. Then, without warning, she vanishes. The disappearance is sudden and complete. One step closer is enough. There is no movement, no retreat, no fading shape. She is simply no longer there. The porch is empty. The space she occupied holds nothing unusual. No sound follows. No air shifts. The cabin returns to its abandoned stillness. As if nothing had been there at all. Those who reach the porch feel a lingering chill. Not cold, but absence. The sense that something had occupied the space moments before and left no trace behind. Standing there produces an unease that encourages retreat rather than exploration. The woman never reappears immediately. Hikers who wait near the cabin report no return that same evening. It is only on future visits, often days or weeks later, that she is seen again, always in the same place, always unmoving. Reports have remained consistent for years. Different hikers describe the same figure, the same posture, the same behavior. No one has ever seen her walk, speak, or react. No one has seen her enter or leave the cabin. Photographs taken closer show only empty boards and shadow. Video behaves the same way, the figure present only until the moment of approach. Researchers have searched records. No clear history of the cabin remains. Property ownership changed hands several times before being forgotten entirely. No confirmed record explains who lived there last or why it was abandoned. Locals share quiet speculation. Some believe the woman is waiting. Others believe she is watching. A few suggest she is neither, but simply remains where she last stood, fixed to a moment that never resolved. The porch itself feels significant. It is a boundary between inside and outside, shelter and forest. She does not step forward or retreat inside. She occupies only that narrow space, as if unable or unwilling to move beyond it. Night deepens the mystery. Those who pass the cabin after sunset report seeing her silhouette against the darkened structure, her shape outlined faintly by moonlight. Approaching at night produces the same result. She vanishes the moment distance closes. No sound accompanies her presence. No footsteps mark her disappearance. No door opens or closes. The cabin remains silent throughout. Animals avoid the clearing at dusk. Deer skirt around it. Birds do not roost nearby. Insects quiet briefly when the figure is present, then resume once she is gone. No one has ever touched her. Those who consider reaching out describe an overwhelming hesitation, as if instinct itself forbids closing that final distance. The moment approach begins, she disappears. Hemlock Ridge remains open and accessible. Trails are maintained. Signs warn only of weather and terrain. Nothing acknowledges the woman on the porch. Yet hikers continue to report her. Always standing. Always silent. Always gone before answers can be found. Sunlight reveals peeling paint and worn wood. The porch creaks under ordinary weight. The forest resumes its sound and motion. Nothing suggests the still figure that stood there hours before. The unmoving posture. The quiet presence. The way she vanished without leaving so much as a shadow behind. Hemlock Ridge does not explain her. It does not reveal her purpose or her story. It offers only repetition, a figure bound to a place and moment that cannot be reached. She stands on the porch when no one expects her. She never moves. And she is never there when someone finally gets close enough to ask why. The cabin known as Quiet Step was built far from any established trail, deep within a stretch of forest that few people ever entered by accident. Reaching it requires careful navigation through uneven ground, dense undergrowth, and landmarks that change with the seasons. Even experienced hikers describe the journey as disorienting, as if the forest resists being crossed directly. The cabin itself is small and plain. It was constructed decades ago as a private retreat, meant for isolation rather than convenience. There are no signs pointing toward it. No cleared paths leading in. Those who find it usually do so intentionally, guided by old maps or second-hand directions passed quietly between locals. The forest around Quiet Step feels unusually still. Trees stand close together, their branches interlocking overhead. Light filters through in narrow bands, never fully illuminating the ground. Sound behaves oddly there, footsteps seeming louder than they should, then suddenly muted as if absorbed by the soil. Visitors often notice the footsteps before anything else. At first, the sound blends naturally with their own movement. A second set of steps, soft and measured, follows close behind. The rhythm matches perfectly, heel and toe aligning with each step taken forward. Instinctively, people assume they are hearing an echo. The forest floor is uneven, layered with leaves and roots that shift underfoot. It seems reasonable that sound might carry strangely. But the footsteps remain consistent even when terrain changes. When visitors stop walking, the footsteps stop as well. The silence that follows is immediate and complete. Starting again brings the footsteps back, matching pace exactly, neither gaining nor falling behind. Turning around reveals nothing. The forest remains empty, every direction visible for several yards between tree trunks. No movement. No disturbance. The ground behind shows only a single set of tracks. The experience intensifies as visitors approach the cabin. The footsteps grow clearer, closer, as if narrowing the distance without changing position. Inside the cabin, the footsteps continue. Those who enter expecting relief find the sound crossing the threshold with them. The wooden floor creaks under their weight, and a second set of creaks responds in perfect time, step for step. The cabin contains very little. A small table. A bench. A narrow sleeping platform. Dust coats every surface, undisturbed by recent use. There is no sign that anyone else has been inside for years. They do not explore the space independently. They remain tied to the Visitora-S movement, responding rather than initiating. Walking from one side of the cabin to the other produces the same mirrored sound. Speaking aloud changes nothing. Voices do not echo back. There is no reply. Only the continued presence of movement without form, keeping pace without intention. Those who test the phenomenon notice a pattern. Speeding up causes the footsteps to quicken instantly. Slowing down brings them into perfect alignment. Even irregular movement, sudden stops or short steps, are mirrored without delay. Running produces the most unsettling effect. The footsteps run as well, matching speed precisely, close enough to feel pressure in the air behind. Stopping abruptly ends the sound at the same instant, leaving silence that feels heavy and close. No one reports being touched. There is no physical contact, no breath felt on skin, no shift in air temperature. The presence remains auditory only, defined by sound and timing. Defined by sound and timing. Leaving the cabin does not end the experience immediately. The footsteps follow visitors back into the forest, remaining present until a certain distance is reached. No one agrees exactly where that boundary lies, only that at some point, the sound fades without warning. Sound returns to normal. Insects buzz. Leaves rustle naturally. Footsteps belong only to the person walking. Looking back reveals nothing unusual, just trees and shadow. Those who revisit Quiet Step report the same experience each time. The footsteps are consistent, unchanged by season or weather. Snow does not affect them. Rain does not disguise them. The experience appears confined to direct perception. Local residents are aware of quiet step. They do not advertise it, but they do not deny its existence. When asked, they advise visitors not to test the footsteps, not to try to outpace them, and not to acknowledge them verbally. Some believe the cabin marks a boundary. They suggest it sits at a place where movement itself is observed, where the act of walking is mirrored by something that does not require form. Others believe the forest learned the rhythm of human travel and now repeats it when disturbed. No one offers a definitive explanation. What remains constant is the rule of balance. The footsteps never lead. They never lag. They follow exactly, as if agreement is required for progress. Those who linger too long describe a subtle fatigue. Not physical exhaustion, but mental strain. The awareness of being matched so precisely becomes difficult to ignore. Movement stops feeling private. Most visitors leave quietly. They do not announce departure. They do not look back more than once. The relief comes slowly, settling in only after the forest releases its attention. Quiet step remains where it has always been. The cabin stands intact, weathered but solid. The forest continues to grow around it, reshaping paths and landmarks. No trail leads directly there, and none ever will. Those who seek it out do so knowing what to expect. They walk carefully, listening closely. When the footsteps begin, they understand the rules instinctively. Keep moving. Do not challenge. Do not respond. Because at quiet step, every movement is noticed. Every pace is matched. And the forest does not allow anyone to walk alone, not until it decides the journey is complete. Raven Hollow Cabin rests in a low valley where tall trees crowd close and sunlight fades early each afternoon. The cabin was built during the height of regional logging, positioned to serve crews who worked long hours cutting timber from the surrounding forest. Its walls were thick, its roof steep, and its interior sparse, designed only for rest between days of labor. During its years of use, sound defined the place. Axes rang through the valley from dawn until evening. Each strike echoed sharply, carried by the hollow and reflected back from distant slopes. The rhythm was constant and familiar, a steady measure of progress as trees were marked, cut, and hauled away. At night, the forest quieted, and the cabin became a place of rest and recovery. When logging operations ended, the crews left quickly. The forest was stripped enough to meet demand, and attention shifted elsewhere. The Raven Hollow cabin was locked, then forgotten. Trails grew over. New growth filled the clearings. The valley returned to stillness. Years passed without incident. Hikers occasionally discovered the cabin, noting its solid construction and isolated position. By day, it felt ordinary. The forest around it was dense but calm. Nothing suggested lingering activity. The first reports came from campers staying nearby. They described hearing distant chopping sounds after nightfall. A steady rhythm of wood being struck, echoing faintly through the valley. At first, it was dismissed as someone else working late or using tools nearby. But the sound did not stop. It continued long into the night, maintaining a consistent pace. Those who investigated found nothing. No lights. No workers. No trees falling. The forest stood unchanged, leaves unmoved, trunks intact. The sound faded as they moved closer, becoming harder to locate, then returned once they stopped. More visitors heard it. The chopping appeared only after dark, beginning shortly after sunset and ending near dawn. Weather did not affect it. Rain, fog, and clear skies all produced the same result. The sound carried through the valley as it once had, precise and measured. The sharp impact of metal on wood. The hollow echo that followed. The cadence remained consistent across recordings made years apart. No environmental noise matched its clarity or timing. The cabin itself seemed connected to the sound. Those who stood near it reported the chopping felt closer, as if originating just beyond the walls. Inside, the sound softened slightly but remained present, vibrating through the logs as if carried by memory rather than air. No new cuts appeared on nearby trees. The forest showed no signs of disturbance. Saplings and mature trunks alike stood untouched. Fallen branches remained where they lay, unaffected by any unseen work. Local belief turned toward repetition. The idea that the valley had absorbed years of labor so thoroughly that it now replayed the pattern when conditions were right. Night, silence, and isolation created the same environment in which the work once took place, allowing sound to return without cause. Others believe the rhythm is intentional. The chopping never progresses. No tree weakens. No trunk falls. The work repeats endlessly, incomplete. Visitors who stay overnight often report physical sensations. The sound creates a sense of pressure, as if the valley narrows around each strike. Some feel compelled to count the swings, only to lose track when the rhythm shifts slightly, then settles again. Sleep becomes difficult. The chopping penetrates dreams, blending with imagined movement. Waking brings immediate recognition of the sound, unchanged by rest or time. Despite curiosity, few remain more than one night. The repetition wears on attention. The absence of visible cause creates unease. People leave feeling as if they interrupted something ongoing, something that did not acknowledge their presence. The sound never responds. Shouting produces no pause. Knocking on trees yields no echo in return. The chopping continues regardless of interference, as steady and indifferent as before. At dawn, the valley falls silent. Birds return. Wind moves through branches. The forest resumes its ordinary soundscape. Nothing suggests activity occurred hours earlier. The cabin stands empty, its interior unchanged. Those who return during daylight often doubt the stories. The place looks peaceful, even inviting. Without the sound, Raven Hollow appears no different from countless abandoned shelters scattered through wooded regions. Night brings certainty. As light fades, the first strikes begin. Soft at first, then clearer as darkness settles. The valley fills once more with the sound of labor without laborers. No one has seen a figure swing an axe. No shadow moves between trees. No footsteps accompany the work. Only sound remains, precise and persistent. Raven Hollow cabin remains standing, weathered but intact. The forest around it grows thicker each year, reclaiming ground once cleared by effort and force. New trees rise where old ones fell long ago, untouched by the nightly chopping. The sound does not adapt. It does not shift to new targets. It does not slow or accelerate. It remains fixed in its original rhythm, tied to a time when the valley echoed with real work and real purpose. Those who listen long enough describe a strange realization. The chopping does not feel aggressive or violent. It feels routine. Necessary. As if stopping it would be the greater disruption. Raven Hollow does not threaten visitors. It does not pursue or warn. It simply continues, filling the night with echoes of effort that no longer produce change. In the darkness, the sound carries across the hollow. Metal striking wood. Again. And again. A task that never ends. A forest that never falls. At Raven Hollow cabin, the work goes on, long after the workers left, and the valley remembers each strike as if it were still waiting for the final tree to come down. Bear Track Ridge rises high above the surrounding valleys, a long slope of pine and stone where the air grows thinner and colder with each step upward. Snow lingers there long after it has melted elsewhere, tucked into shaded gullies and pressed against the north-facing rock. The ridge earned its name from the abundance of wildlife tracks that crisscross the ground, layered over one another through decades of movement. Near the upper tree line stands a solitary cabin. It was built from thick logs cut nearby, its walls reinforced with heavy beams meant to withstand harsh winters and curious animals. The cabin faces outward toward the valley, its back pressed close to the forest as if seeking shelter from what moves among the trees. From a distance, it looks sturdy and unremarkable, a practical structure in an unforgiving place. Deep grooves run vertically and diagonally across the exterior logs. Some marks are clustered tightly together. Others stand alone, long and deliberate, carved into wood that should have resisted most forces. The grooves are too wide, too deep, and too evenly spaced to match known wildlife in the region. They look like claw marks. Each one is longer than a human hand. The spacing between them suggests a reach far wider than any bear native to the area. The depth indicates strength applied steadily rather than in panic or defense. The marks do not appear random. They begin near the ground in some places and extend upward well beyond head height, stopping abruptly as if the thing that made them chose to stop rather than ran out of reach. The door is untouched. Windows remain intact. The roof shows no damage. Whatever marked the walls did not attempt to enter in the usual ways. It interacted only with the structure itself, focusing on the logs, pressing force directly into the wood. The cabin was occupied decades ago. Records show it was used seasonally by a small family who spent summers and early winters there. Neighbors recalled them as experienced and cautious, familiar with the dangers of remote living. They understood wildlife and took appropriate precautions. The claw marks, however, were fresh when discovered, cutting pale lines through darkened wood. Investigators at the time attributed the damage to an unusually large animal. Measurements were taken. Photographs archived. Explanations were offered but never fully satisfied those who examined the site closely. No animal in the region matched the size, strength, and pattern required to produce the marks. Over time, the cabin was abandoned. Weather aged the wood. Moss crept along the base. Snow and ice worked into the grooves, widening them slightly but never softening their edges. The marks remain clearly visible even now, decades later. Visitors who approach the cabin often notice something else. The forest around Bear Track Ridge feels unusually quiet. Birds keep their distance. Wind moves through the trees unevenly, as if avoiding certain pockets of space. Footsteps sound louder than they should, echoing faintly even when the ground is soft. Standing near the marked walls produces a distinct sensation. The feeling is not fear exactly, but awareness. As if the space is attentive, listening for movement rather than responding to it. Some visitors report hearing sounds at night. Low scraping noises that travel along the exterior walls, slow and measured. They never repeat in the same pattern. They move from one side of the cabin to another, sometimes pausing for long stretches. Those who listen too closely describe an urge to remain silent, convinced that noise would draw attention. No one has reported seeing what makes the sounds. Tracks found around the cabin are inconsistent. Large impressions appear in snow or soft ground, but they do not match the claw spacing on the walls. Researchers have returned to Bear Track Ridge multiple times. They measured the grooves again and again, compared them against known species, and tested the hardness of the wood. The force required to produce such marks would exceed what is typical for animals in the region, especially without splintering the logs completely. The marks appear controlled. That detail unsettles experts more than the size. Whatever made them applied pressure carefully enough to carve without destroying, to mark without breaking through. Local stories offer explanations that avoid specifics. Some say the ridge attracts things that move differently. Others believe the cabin was built too close to a natural path used long before humans arrived. According to these stories, the marks are not an attack, but a warning, or perhaps a boundary test. There are those who claim the claw marks change. They say new grooves appear after especially cold nights, slightly lighter in color than the older ones. These reports are difficult to confirm, as weather and lighting alter appearance easily. Still, some visitors insist they have seen marks that were not there before. Attempts to repair the cabin have failed. Planks installed over damaged areas crack prematurely. Fresh wood shows faint impressions within weeks, shallow at first, then deeper. Eventually, all repair efforts were abandoned, leaving the cabin as it is. Despite this, no violent incidents have been reported. The place does not feel aggressive. It feels guarded. Hikers who camp nearby often leave early. They report restless sleep and the sensation of being observed from just beyond the firelight. Dreams feature heavy footsteps and towering shapes that never fully resolve. Most wake before dawn and depart without exploring further. The claw marks remain the clearest evidence. They are undeniable, physical, and resistant to explanation. They do not fade with time. They do not erode away. They hold their shape as if preserved intentionally. Bear Track Ridge itself feels unchanged. The forest grows. Snow falls and melts. Seasons pass in familiar cycles. Only the cabin stands apart, marked and watched, carrying evidence of something that chose to leave its impression rather than make itself known. Visitors are advised not to touch the grooves. Those who do describe an odd vibration beneath their fingertips, a faint hum that fades quickly. Whether this is imagination or something else, no one can say. The cabin remains unoccupied. No one stays there anymore. It is visited briefly, documented, then left behind. The ridge seems content with this arrangement, quiet and still once people move on. At Bear Track Ridge, the claw marks are not a mystery of violence, but of scale and intent. They are too large to belong to any known animal. They do not tell a story of attack or escape. They suggest presence. A reminder etched into wood that something powerful once stood there, pressed its mark into the cabin walls, and chose not to go any further. And whatever made those marks has not returned openly. It does not need to. The evidence remains, carved deep into the logs, waiting for anyone who climbs the ridge to see and understand that some places are not defined by what appears, but by what leaves its trace and then watches quietly from beyond the trees. The cabin at Mistbreak Ridge sits high among rolling slopes where fog gathers easily and lingers longer than expected. The forest there is thick and uneven, with narrow paths that twist between old trees and rocky ground. On clear days, the cabin is easy to spot, a small structure perched just beyond a bend in the trail, its outline steady against the sky. Fog changes everything. When mist rolls in, it arrives without urgency, spilling over the ridge and sinking into the trees. Sound dulls. Distance shortens. The world narrows to a few pale shapes drifting in and out of view. It is during these moments that the cabin disappears. Hikers report seeing it clearly from a distance, then losing sight of it entirely once the fog thickens. Those who know the ridge well still search for it. They follow familiar turns, count steps, recognize rocks and roots beneath their boots. Yet when the fog settles fully, landmarks no longer align. Paths feel longer. Turns feel sharper. The forest rearranges itself subtly, just enough to break confidence. Some enter the cabin just before the fog arrives. They step inside to wait out the weather, closing the door behind them as mist presses against the windows. Inside, the space is simple. A table. A bench. A cold hearth. Nothing appears unusual. That is when leaving becomes difficult. Those who attempt to exit during heavy fog often cannot find the door they entered through. The interior seems unchanged, yet the familiar doorway opens into something different. Instead of the expected porch, there is forest. Trees stand close, their trunks pale and indistinct in the fog. The ground slopes in directions that do not match memory. Turning back reveals the same interior, quiet and still, as if the cabin itself has not moved. Stepping outside deepens the confusion. The forest feels tighter there, branches closer, paths narrower. Sound behaves strangely. Footsteps echo briefly, then vanish. Voices feel swallowed by the mist. The forest shifts around them. Paths curve where they should run straight. Clearings appear where none existed before, then vanish when approached. Trees seem familiar at first glance, then subtly wrong, their spacing just off enough to cause hesitation. Those lost inside the fog describe a powerful sense of displacement. Time stretches. Minutes feel longer. The light remains flat and directionless, offering no hint of sun or shadow. Compasses spin slowly or fail entirely. Panic makes it worse. Moving too quickly leads deeper into unfamiliar ground. Standing still produces the sensation of being watched, not from a single point, but from all directions at once. Some people find their way out by accident. They stumble through the fog until it thins suddenly, revealing the ridge below or a familiar trail. When they look back, the cabin is visible again, sitting exactly where it should have been. Others are not so fortunate. Search teams have found hikers days later, exhausted and confused, wandering sections of forest they insisted they had never entered. Their descriptions of the cabina's interior remain consistent, even when details should differ. No one has ever found the cabin while fully lost. It appears only at the edge of certainty, visible when one believes they know where they are. Once doubt settles in, the structure seems to withdraw, leaving only forest behind. Locals believe the fog is the key. Mistbreak Ridge earned its name long before the cabin was built. Fog there is known to roll uphill against wind, ignoring patterns that govern weather elsewhere. They believe the structure exists in a fragile balance, visible only when the land allows it. When fog claims the ridge, the cabin slips just out of reach, no longer anchored to a single place. Others believe the forest responds. The trees around Mistbreak Ridge are old, their roots tangled deep beneath the soil. Over time, paths have been worn thin by repeated movement. In fog, those paths blur, leaving only impressions that lead nowhere. The forest shifts, not by moving, but by confusing. Angles change. Distances lie. Familiar patterns fail. Those inside the fog feel the landscape adjusting around them, always slightly ahead of their understanding. Those who remain calm, who slow their movement and avoid chasing landmarks, often find the fog thinning naturally. The more they try to escape, the farther they drift from where they began. The exit appears suddenly, the forest opening back into a known shape. Those who rush become lost. The fog does not last forever. Eventually, it lifts, retreating downslope as quietly as it arrived. When it does, the ridge looks ordinary again. The cabin stands visible and solid. Trails reconnect. Landmarks return to their expected places. Those who emerge often find themselves far from where they entered. Others near the ridge's edge, unable to explain how they traveled so far without remembering the journey. The cabin remains unchanged after each incident. No signs of damage. No markings inside. No indication that anyone was trapped there longer than expected. It waits quietly for the next clear day. Visitors who return describe a lingering unease. The forest feels watchful, not hostile, but attentive. Fog patches on other trails cause hesitation. The memory of lost direction lingers long after leaving the ridge. Mistbreak Ridge remains open to hikers. Maps mark the trails clearly. Signs warn of weather and visibility, but nothing more. Those who know the stories watch the sky carefully, turning back at the first hint of mist. The cabin stands as long as it is allowed. When fog thickens, it disappears, leaving those who seek shelter with a forest that no longer behaves as it should. Those who enter during fog often cannot find the exit. The forest shifts around them, not violently, but persistently, guiding them through a place that no longer matches memory. Mistbreak Ridge does not close its doors. It simply rearranges what lies beyond them, reminding those who enter that visibility and certainty are fragile things, and that sometimes, the safest path is the one taken before the fog arrives. Cold Hearth Cabin rests in a shallow hollow where pine trees grow close and the ground holds moisture long after rain has passed. The path leading to it is narrow and uneven, softened by years of fallen needles and slow decay. The cabin was built for warmth. Its stone fireplace dominates the main room, wide and carefully constructed, meant to hold heat through long nights. Thick walls trap air inside, keeping cold out and smoke in. Records suggest the cabin was once used year-round, occupied by someone who depended on fire more than comfort. The smell of smoke never left. Visitors notice it before anything else. The scent lingers in the air, old but distinct, like wood burned recently rather than decades ago. It clings to clothing and hair, subtle but persistent, fading only after leaving the hollow entirely. No fire has burned there in years. The hearth is cold to the touch. Ashes lie undisturbed, gray and compacted, as if pressed down by time rather than use. Then the warmth appears. Those who step closer to the fireplace feel it suddenly, a gentle rise in temperature that does not spread beyond a small radius. The air near the hearth grows noticeably warmer, comfortable rather than hot, as if someone had just been sitting there moments ago. The sensation is brief but unmistakable. It does not pulse or flicker. It settles into place and holds, creating a pocket of warmth that contrasts sharply with the cool air elsewhere in the cabin. Moving away causes it to fade quickly, leaving behind only the lingering scent of smoke. The warmth carries the impression of recent presence, as though someone stepped away from the fire without warning. People glance toward doorways and corners, expecting to see movement. There is never anyone there. The cabin remains empty. Furniture sits exactly where it was left. A single chair faces the hearth, angled slightly as if pulled closer for comfort. A small table rests nearby, its surface marked with old rings and scratches. Nothing appears disturbed. The warmth does not follow. It stays anchored to the fireplace, confined to that familiar space. No matter where visitors stand, the sensation does not shift or expand. It waits, patient and unchanged. Temperatures outside drop quickly in the hollow, and the contrast inside the cabin sharpens. Some visitors report hearing faint sounds. Not voices, not movement, but subtle noises associated with fire. A soft settling sound. A low, nearly imagined crackle. These sounds never repeat clearly and are often dismissed until others report the same thing independently. The smell deepens after dark. It becomes richer, fuller, as if smoke were still trapped in the stone itself. Windows remain clear. No haze forms. The scent exists without source. Attempts to explain the warmth have failed. Thermal readings show no active heat. The stone temperature remains consistent with the rest of the room. Airflow tests reveal no hidden vents or insulation anomalies. The warmth is felt, not measured. The effect never occurs outside the cabin. Standing near the exterior wall brings no change. Only the interior hearth produces the sensation, as if the cabin itself holds the memory of fire rather than the stone alone. Those who linger too long near the hearth describe a quiet unease. Not fear, but the sense of intrusion. The warmth feels personal, meant for someone else. Remaining there creates the impression of occupying a space that has not been offered. Most step back instinctively. The relief is immediate. Cool air returns. The room feels empty again. The smell of smoke softens but does not disappear. Local residents speak carefully about Cold Hearth Cabin. They say it was once home to someone who valued routine and warmth above all else. Someone who rarely left, especially during winter. Details vary, and no single account matches another exactly. The fire was always lit. Even during mild weather, smoke could be seen drifting from the chimney. The cabin glowed faintly at night, a constant point of warmth in the hollow. When the fire finally went out, no one remembers seeing it happen. The cabin was simply found cold one morning. No explanation was offered. No signs of departure were found. The place was left as it was, and over time, it became something to avoid rather than reclaim. Visitors today are warned not to attempt to light a fire. Those who have tried report that flames refuse to catch properly. Wood smolders without heat, producing smoke without warmth. The effort leaves the hearth darker but no more alive. The warmth returns only when no fire is present. It arrives quietly, without signal, and leaves just as easily. Cameras capture nothing unusual. Video shows an empty room. Audio records only silence and ambient noise. The experience exists entirely in presence, felt rather than documented. Some visitors report an emotional response. Standing near the hearth brings a sudden sense of calm, followed by sadness that does not seem to belong to them. The feeling fades quickly once they step away, leaving behind confusion rather than distress. Cold Hearth Cabin remains intact. The roof holds. The walls stand firm. The fireplace waits, clean and unused, holding warmth that cannot be measured. By day, the cabin feels quiet and still. By night, the smell of smoke deepens, and the hearth offers its familiar comfort to anyone who stands too close. It feels like arriving just after someone has left, missing them by moments rather than years. No one stays long. Visitors step back into the cool air of the forest, carrying the scent with them until distance finally breaks it apart. Looking back at the cabin reveals nothing unusual. No light. No movement. No sign of life. And yet, inside Cold Hearth Cabin, warmth still gathers near the fireplace, steady and patient, as if the fire never truly went out, and whoever tended it has only stepped away for a moment, expecting to return. Whistler's Rest sits along a narrow ridge where the forest thins and the land drops sharply on both sides. The cabin was built as a stopping point for travelers moving through the high country, a place to rest before descending into lower valleys. Its position offered long views and steady air currents, but little shelter from sound. Pine trees stand spaced apart, their needles whispering softly when the wind moves through. The cabin itself is simple and weather-worn, its porch facing the slope below. From a distance, nothing about Whistler's Rest seems unusual. The sounds begin after sunset. As light fades and the forest darkens, a thin, high-pitched whistle emerges from somewhere beyond the trees. At first, it is faint enough to mistake for wind passing through branches or gaps in stone. The tone is steady, narrow, and precise. Then it starts to move. Listeners describe the whistling as approaching slowly, drifting between trunks and over uneven ground. It does not follow a straight line. Instead, it curves and shifts, as if guided deliberately through the forest. The pitch remains consistent, but the volume increases as distance closes. Those who turn to face it cannot locate the source. The sound does not come from a single direction. It seems to surround the listener, sliding from one side of the ridge to the other. Stepping toward it changes nothing. The whistle continues its approach, unbothered by movement. As it draws nearer, the sound sharpens. The tone becomes clearer, cutting through other ambient noise. Insects quiet. Wind seems to soften. The forest feels attentive, as if everything else has paused to allow the sound through. Then it stops. The silence arrives abruptly, complete and unsettling. The whistle does not fade or drift away. It ends instantly, as if cut off. The final position is always the same. Those who experience it describe a sudden awareness of presence. Not seen or felt physically, but known. The instinct to turn around is immediate and powerful. Yet those who do report finding nothing there. Trees stand unchanged. Shadows remain still. The forest offers no sign of movement. Moments pass in silence. Breathing feels louder. Heartbeats seem exaggerated. Then, without warning, the sound begins again from a new distance, repeating the same slow approach. Campers staying at Whistler's Rest hear it most clearly. Inside the cabin, the whistle penetrates walls and windows without distortion. Sleep becomes difficult. The anticipation of the Whistler's arrival keeps attention fixed outward. Even when exhaustion takes hold, the sudden silence behind them pulls awareness back to the present. Audio recordings capture the sound inconsistently. Some devices record a clear, steady whistle. Others capture nothing but ambient noise. Playback does not always match what listeners remember hearing, suggesting the sound may interact with perception as much as air. Local hikers know the pattern well. They advise newcomers not to follow the sound or attempt to confront it. Those who do report disorientation, losing sense of direction on familiar trails. The ridge, already narrow, feels tighter, more confining. The whistle does not react to voices. Calling out produces no change. Whistling back yields no response. The sound continues its approach regardless, stopping in the same place every time. No one has identified a physical source. There are no vents, instruments, or structures capable of producing such a tone. Wind conditions do not correlate reliably with the sound's appearance. The whistle occurs on still nights as often as breezy ones. Some believe the ridge itself shapes the sound. Air currents moving along the slope may create unusual acoustic effects, bending sound in ways that mimic movement. But this theory fails to explain the precision of the stopping point or the sensation of proximity. That it behaves less like noise and more like signal. The approach draws attention. The sudden stop creates awareness. The repetition reinforces focus on position and vulnerability. Those who remain at Whistler's Rest for multiple nights report the sound grows more familiar. Not less unsettling, but predictable. The whistle follows the same pattern, night after night. The anticipation becomes part of the experience, as if the cabin and its surroundings operate on a schedule defined by sound rather than time. Just before the whistle stops, the pitch sometimes changes slightly, dipping or rising for a fraction of a second. This moment creates the impression of adjustment, as if the sound aligns itself precisely before ending. No one has reported being touched or harmed. The experience remains limited to sound and sensation. Yet the psychological effect lingers. People leave with heightened awareness of their surroundings, especially behind them. At dawn, the ridge returns to normal. Birds resume calls. Wind moves freely. The forest loses its tension. The cabin looks harmless. The ridge feels open. But those who have heard it know the difference. They remember the slow approach through darkness. The narrowing of attention. The sudden silence at their back. Whistler's Rest does not announce itself with danger. It does not trap or pursue. It simply introduces a sound that refuses to remain distant, then removes it at the moment awareness peaks. The whistle never explains itself. It does not repeat words or messages. It carries no melody. It exists only as motion and proximity, a line drawn through space and time. At night on the ridge, when the forest grows still and the cabin creaks softly in the dark, the sound returns. High-pitched. Focused. Moving closer through the trees. Until it reaches the place no one wants it to be. Right behind you. And then it stops. Narrow Spine Cabin sits atop a thin ridge where the land narrows to a blade of stone. On both sides, the ground drops away sharply into steep valleys filled with dark forest and broken rock. The ridge is just wide enough for a single path, a strip of earth that feels suspended between open air. The cabin was built there for the view. From its porch, the world stretches endlessly in both directions. Sky dominates the horizon. Clouds move below eye level. Wind usually moves freely across the ridge, rushing upward from the valleys and spilling over the spine in constant motion. But near the cabin, the wind behaves differently. It slows without reason, shifting direction suddenly or stopping altogether. On calm days, this is barely noticeable. On overcast afternoons, the stillness becomes unsettling, as if the ridge itself is holding its breath. The cabin is small but solid. Heavy beams anchor it to the stone beneath. The structure leans slightly inward, built to resist the constant pull of gravity from both sides. Its door faces the narrow path, while its back presses close to exposed rock. For years, hikers and surveyors used the cabin as a waypoint. They rested there briefly, aware of the drop but confident in their footing. The ridge demanded respect, but it did not feel dangerous as long as attention was paid. That changed gradually. People began reporting strange sensations while walking near the cabin. A sudden imbalance. A shift in weight that did not match their movement. Then the reports grew more specific. Visitors described feeling pressure against their backs or shoulders, as if hands were placed there briefly. The sensation always angled toward the edge, never toward the center of the ridge. Most stumbled and caught themselves. Some dropped to their knees instinctively, gripping the ground as the sensation passed. Others froze, convinced that moving would make it worse. In every case, the pressure faded once distance from the edge increased. No marks were left behind. No bruises. No disturbed soil. Only the memory of contact that felt deliberate and directional. Those who stayed overnight experienced stronger effects. Inside the cabin, sleep was restless. The sound of movement outside, just beyond the walls, kept many awake. Not footsteps, but subtle shifts, like weight being transferred along the ridge itself. Several reported waking with the sensation of being tilted, as if the cabin had moved closer to the edge while they slept. It had not. The most unsettling experiences occurred at dusk. As light faded, depth perception became unreliable. The valleys darkened first, swallowing detail until the edges of the ridge seemed to dissolve into shadow. Standing near the cabin during this time produced an intense awareness of gravity. People felt drawn outward. Not by fear, but by a strange certainty that balance required movement toward the drop. The unseen force pressed more firmly, not violently, but insistently. It adjusted as people shifted, maintaining contact until they stepped back toward the center of the ridge. Only then did it stop. Local records show several accidents near Narrow Spine Cabin, though none were directly witnessed. Equipment was found near the edges. Personal items recovered from slopes far below. In each case, there was no sign of struggle or panic. Just absence. After the third incident, official use of the cabin was discontinued. Signs were posted advising caution, though they did not explain why. The path remains accessible, but most hikers turn back before reaching the cabin now, uneasy without knowing exactly why. Researchers have studied the ridge. They measured wind patterns, seismic vibration, and magnetic fields. Narrow Spine Ridge does amplify certain low-frequency vibrations, especially during temperature shifts. These vibrations can affect balance and spatial perception. But they do not explain the sensation of being touched. Witnesses consistently describe contact that feels shaped and intentional. Pressure that moves, adjusts, and stops only when the person retreats from danger. Local stories offer their own explanation. They say the ridge has always rejected stillness. That standing in one place for too long is a mistake. According to these accounts, the spine demands movement and balance. And anything that lingers too close to the edge is corrected. Some believe the unseen force is protective rather than hostile. That it pushes people away from places where one wrong step could be fatal. Others disagree, pointing out that the force does not always guide toward safety, only toward the edge. What unsettles most visitors is the lack of emotion. The pressure does not feel angry or urgent. Those who approach the edge deliberately often feel it sooner. Those who move quickly through the area feel it less. Movement seems to confuse the effect, reducing its intensity. Stopping allows it to focus. The cabin itself appears unaffected. Inside, the sensation fades almost completely. Walls provide a sense of boundary, though the feeling returns the moment someone steps back outside. Attempts to reinforce safety near the edges have failed. Railings loosen unexpectedly. Anchors pull free from stone. Markers placed too close to the drop are found displaced, shifted outward as if nudged. No one has reported being pushed inside the cabin. The force remains outside, tied to open space and exposure. It belongs to the ridge, not the structure built upon it. At night, Narrow Spine Ridge becomes especially dangerous. Darkness erases the horizon entirely. The drop on both sides becomes invisible, felt only through shifting air and instinct. Those who venture out after sunset describe the pressure as constant, guiding movement even when no direction can be seen. Most leave before dark. Those who remain describe a powerful urge to lie flat against the ground, spreading weight evenly to avoid standing. Some sleep outside rather than risk walking back to the cabin. Wind resumes its usual flow. The path feels solid again. The edge looks sharp and unmistakable in daylight. The idea of unseen hands feels distant, almost impossible. Narrow Spine Cabin still stands, weathered but intact. It watches the ridge without interfering, a human attempt to occupy a place that resists occupation. The ridge does not chase people away. It does not threaten or warn. It simply applies pressure where pressure is needed, pushing bodies toward imbalance, reminding them how narrow the margin truly is. At Narrow Spine Cabin, the danger is not what can be seen. It is the sensation of being guided by something unseen. Toward an edge that feels closer than it should. In a place where the land itself seems to decide where a person belongs. The cabin at Old Rope Ridge sits on uneven ground where the forest thins just enough to let light through. The trees there are tall and spaced irregularly, their branches tangled high above, their roots gripping stone and soil beneath. A narrow trail leads up the ridge, worn by years of cautious travel, ending at a small clearing where the cabin waits. It has been empty for a long time. The structure is simple, built from rough timber, its roof bowed slightly under the weight of age. The door hangs straight, unopened but not sealed. Inside, dust lies evenly across the floor, undisturbed by recent footsteps. Nothing suggests urgency or abandonment. It feels paused, not forgotten. Nearby stands the tree. It is older than the cabin, thicker at the trunk, its bark split and weathered. From one of its lower branches hangs a rope, looped once and left there long ago. The fibers are darkened by rain and sun, stiff in places, softened in others. It does not appear recently tied, yet it remains intact. The rope sways. It moves gently back and forth, even on days when the air is still. Visitors notice it immediately. At first, they assume a breeze has passed unnoticed. They step closer, watching the surrounding forest. Nothing else moves. The movement does not accelerate. It does not swing wildly or snap taut. It rocks patiently, left to right, pausing briefly at the end of each arc before returning the other way. The sound seems to soften. Birds quiet briefly. Even footsteps feel louder than they should, crunching against the forest floor with a clarity that draws attention to every movement. The rope never stops completely. Even after long minutes, it continues to sway, its motion unbroken. Watching it creates the sense of waiting for something to happen, though nothing ever does. No one knows who placed it there. Records of the cabin are incomplete. Ownership changed hands several times before being lost to time. Some believe the cabin was used briefly by travelers or workers, then left behind when routes shifted. Others believe the ridge was always avoided. Local stories mention the rope in passing, spoken of quietly rather than explained. It was already there when people first noticed the cabin. No one recalls seeing it added or removed. Attempts have been made to interfere. Some visitors tried to steady the rope, reaching out to hold it still. The moment contact was made, the motion stopped entirely. Releasing it caused the sway to resume. Not immediately, but after a short pause, as if waiting. The motion returned gradually, settling back into the same slow rhythm as before. Cutting the rope was considered. Those who brought tools reported a strong hesitation when standing beneath the branch. Not fear exactly, but resistance, a sense that the act would be wrong in a way they could not define. No one has ever removed it. At night, the effect deepens. Moonlight filters through branches, casting pale shadows across the clearing. The rope is easier to see then, its movement more noticeable against the darkness. The cabin behind it feels farther away at night, as though the clearing has widened slightly. The rope's shadow moves differently. It stretches and shortens on the ground, lagging just behind the rope itself. The delay is subtle but perceptible, as if the shadow must decide where to fall before doing so. Those who stay near the cabin overnight report difficulty sleeping. The rope is often visible from inside, framed through the doorway or window. Watching it sway in the dark produces a strange pull on attention, drawing the eye back again and again. Some report hearing faint sounds. Not creaking wood or snapping fiber, but a soft, rhythmic shift, like fabric moving slowly through air. The cabin itself remains quiet. No footsteps circle it. No doors move. No lights appear. The only consistent activity is the rope, moving without explanation. Locals offer their interpretations carefully. Some say the rope marks a decision that was never finished. A moment that did not resolve cleanly, left suspended rather than concluded. The motion, they believe, reflects that pause, repeating endlessly. Others believe the rope is a boundary. They say it hangs where the forest thins for a reason, marking a point between shelter and wilderness. The rope does not react to people directly. It does not swing faster when approached. It does not change direction. It does not reach outward. It maintains its slow, even pace regardless of who watches. Time does not affect it. The rope sways in summer heat and winter cold. Snow gathers on the branch but does not interrupt the motion. Rain darkens the fibers, but the arc remains the same. Animals avoid the immediate area. Deer tracks circle the clearing but do not cross beneath the rope. Birds perch on nearby branches but never on the one that holds it. By daylight, Old Rope Ridge appears ordinary. Sunlight reveals the cabin's weathered wood and the tree's rough bark. The rope hangs visibly, moving just enough to catch the eye. Everything else remains still. Visitors often leave unsettled. They struggle to explain why the sight lingers in their thoughts long after departing. The motion is simple, even gentle, yet it carries an impression that does not fade easily. Old Rope Ridge is not marked or restricted. Trails remain open. No signs warn visitors away. The cabin stands quietly, offering no answers. Yet the rope continues to sway. It moves without wind. It responds to no visible force. It neither invites nor repels. It simply hangs there, patient and persistent, marking time in its own way. Those who return to the ridge often look for it first. They check the tree before the cabin, confirming that it is still there, still moving. The cabin remains empty. The forest remains silent. And beneath the old tree at Old Rope Ridge, the rope continues to sway, back and forth, measuring moments that never end, holding a place in motion that refuses to come to rest. Deepwood Cabin sits where the forest grows unnaturally thick, at a point where trees crowd together as if competing for the same narrow space. Branches twist and overlap high above, blocking much of the sky and leaving the ground below in constant shadow. The air feels cooler there, heavier, carrying the damp scent of moss and bark. The path leading to the cabin is difficult to follow. What should be a clear trail narrows and fades as it enters the dense growth. Roots cross the ground like knotted ropes. Even during midday, light struggles to reach the forest floor. The cabin appears suddenly. One moment there is only trees, then a small wooden structure stands among them, pressed close on all sides. It is old but intact, its walls darkened by age and moisture. No clearing surrounds it. The forest presses right up to the door and windows, as if the cabin was placed after the trees had already claimed the land. Visitors often remark on the quiet. It is not complete silence, but something close to it. Insects are fewer. Bird calls sound distant and infrequent. The forest feels restrained, as though sound itself has difficulty moving through the dense growth. The trees near Deepwood Cabin look different. Their trunks are thicker than expected, bark ridged and layered in complex patterns. Knots and scars appear more pronounced, forming shapes that draw the eye without explanation. It is easy to find oneself staring at them longer than intended. That is usually when the faces appear. They do not emerge all at once. At first, it is a suggestion. A curve that resembles a cheek. A dark line that could be an eye socket. The shapes form naturally within the bark, subtle and brief. Then they become unmistakable. Faces appear clearly for just a moment, formed by the natural patterns of wood. Eyes seem to open. Mouths take shape. Expressions vary, some neutral, some intent. They do not move, but they feel aware. The faces vanish as quickly as they appear. Blinking is often enough to make them disappear. Looking directly causes the features to dissolve back into ordinary bark. Turning away and looking again rarely brings the same face back. The sensation of being watched lingers. Visitors describe a pressure between the shoulders, an awareness of attention coming from all directions at once. Standing still increases the feeling. Moving does not always lessen it. The faces never appear on the same tree twice. They shift location unpredictably, appearing on trunks close to the cabin or farther into the forest. Some appear at eye level. Others are higher, partially hidden among branches. The effect creates a sense of depth, as if the forest itself is observing. No sound accompanies the appearances. The trees do not creak or shift. Leaves do not stir. The faces exist without disturbance, emerging and vanishing within the stillness. Inside Deepwood Cabin, the feeling continues. Windows look out directly into bark and shadow. There is no distance between interior and forest. Standing inside creates the impression of being surrounded rather than sheltered. Some visitors report seeing faces reflected faintly in the glass. Not clear enough to identify, but present long enough to cause unease. Turning toward the window reveals only trees, unchanged and silent. The faces do not follow movement. They appear independently of where a visitor stands or looks. The watching sensation remains constant, as if attention is shared rather than focused. Those who stay longer notice the forest feels closer. Distances become harder to judge. Paths seem shorter on the way in and longer on the way out. The trees appear to lean slightly inward, though no physical movement can be confirmed. Attempts to photograph the faces rarely succeed. Images show ordinary bark patterns, nothing unusual. Review of footage fails to capture what was seen clearly in person. The experience resists documentation, existing only in the moment. Local knowledge about Deepwood Cabin is limited. Few people claim ownership or responsibility for it. It appears on older maps without explanation. No records describe why it was built so deep within the forest or who last used it. Those familiar with the area advise brief visits only. They say the faces do not appear to everyone. But when they do, it is best not to linger. They caution against trying to study the bark too closely, suggesting attention invites more attention in return. No one reports the faces speaking. There are no words, no sounds, no messages. Animals behave differently near the cabin. Tracks are sparse. Birds avoid perching close. Larger animals skirt the area entirely, choosing longer routes through thinner forest. At dusk, the effect intensifies. Light fades unevenly beneath the canopy, and shadows deepen around the trunks. The bark patterns grow more pronounced, and faces appear more frequently, though still briefly. The sense of being observed becomes harder to ignore. Leaving the area brings relief. As distance increases, the forest slowly returns to normal density. Sound resumes. The feeling of attention fades gradually rather than instantly, as if released reluctantly. Looking back from the edge of the thick growth reveals nothing unusual. The forest appears ordinary again, dense but natural. No faces remain. No movement suggests pursuit. Deepwood Cabin remains where it is. The structure stands quiet and unused, pressed into a forest that seems alive in a way difficult to define. It does not attract crowds or curiosity seekers. Those who go there do so intentionally or by rare accident. The faces continue to appear. They watch without movement or sound. They exist for seconds at a time, then vanish, leaving behind only bark and shadow. Visitors leave with the same conclusion. Deepwood Cabin is not hidden. It is being watched. And the forest around it is paying very close attention to anyone who steps inside. Last Light stands on a low rise overlooking open ground where storms arrive without warning. The cabin was built decades ago as an emergency shelter, a final refuge for travelers caught between long distances and sudden weather. Its position was intentional. From the road, it could be seen from far away, a simple structure meant to offer safety when daylight failed and skies turned dangerous. For years, it served that purpose. When storms rolled in, people gathered inside. Lanterns were lit. The cabin glowed warmly against darkening land. A steady presence while wind and rain battered the hills. Those who stayed there remembered the sense of relief that came with seeing its light just before nightfall. Eventually, the road was rerouted. Modern travel made the shelter unnecessary. Power lines were removed. Supplies were cleared out. The cabin was locked and left behind. No longer needed in a landscape shaped by faster routes and better forecasts. Time weathered the wood. The roof sagged slightly. Windows clouded with dust. The door stayed shut, its hinges stiff but intact. During the day, Last Light looked empty and quiet, another forgotten building standing alone against the sky. At dusk, the glow returned. The first sightings came from drivers passing on the new road. As the sun dropped and shadows stretched, a faint light appeared in the cabin windows. It was subtle, more suggestion than illumination, but clearly visible against the darkening interior. There was no power. Electrical lines had been cut years earlier. Inspectors confirmed there was no wiring capable of carrying current. No generators were present. Yet the windows glowed softly every evening, beginning just before full darkness and fading slowly as night deepened. The light did not flicker. It remained steady and warm, similar to lantern light rather than electric brightness. From a distance, it looked inviting, familiar, and purposeful, as if someone inside prepared the cabin for another stormy night. Those who approached felt a shift. Walking toward Last Light at dusk produced a strange quiet. Wind softened. Distant sounds faded. The glow seemed to intensify slightly as distance closed, not brighter, but clearer, more defined. Reaching the door revealed nothing. The cabin was empty. The interior lay dark and cold. No lanterns burned. No candles were lit. No windows showed any source for the glow visible from outside. Stepping back out caused the light to return. From a few steps away, the windows glowed again, as if responding to distance rather than time. Approaching once more made the light vanish, leaving only reflected sky and shadow. This pattern repeated consistently. The glow appeared only when the cabin was observed from afar. The moment someone tried to confirm its source, it withdrew. No one has seen the light turn on or off. It is simply present or absent depending on proximity. Local belief formed around the idea of function. Last Light was built to be seen at dusk, to signal safety to those still traveling. The cabin learned its role so well that it continues performing it, regardless of whether anyone is inside to benefit. Others believe the glow marks expectation. Storms once drove people toward the shelter at sunset. The final moments before night were critical. The light represented hope and arrival. Those moments, repeated countless times, pressed themselves into the place. The glow appears strongest before storms. On evenings when clouds gather and air pressure drops, the light becomes more noticeable. Visitors who linger near the cabin report subtle effects. Time feels stretched during the transition from day to night. The boundary between light and darkness seems less clear. Watching the windows glow creates a sense of anticipation, as if something is about to happen that never quite does. Some describe an urge to wait. Not to enter, but to remain nearby until full night arrives. Photographs capture the glow inconsistently. Some images show faint illumination. Others show nothing at all. The effect appears sensitive to angle, distance, and timing, resisting clear documentation. No sounds accompany the light. There are no footsteps, no voices, no movement inside the cabin. The experience is entirely visual, quiet, and restrained. At full night, the glow fades. The windows darken gradually until they match the surrounding shadow. The cabin becomes just another silhouette against the land. The moment passes without ceremony. Sunlight reveals dust and emptiness. The cabin stands unchanged, offering no sign that it held light hours earlier. Those who return again and again notice the consistency. The glow always appears at dusk. Never earlier. Never late at night. The glow respects the same timing that once mattered most, the final light before darkness claimed the land. Last light does not mislead. It does not draw people inside or promise warmth it cannot provide. It simply marks a moment, repeating a signal long after its original purpose ended. Some believe the cabin remembers those who relied on it. Travelers who reached shelter just in time. Families who waited out storms together. Moments when light meant survival. The glow honors those memories without recreating them fully. The cabin remains unlocked now. Visitors may enter freely during the day. Many do, expecting something more dramatic. They find only silence and empty space. At dusk, most step back. They watch from a distance as the windows glow once more, faint but unmistakable, holding steady against the fading sky. Not as a shelter, but as a reminder. That once, when storms came and daylight failed, this place offered safety. And even now, with no power and no people inside, it still knows when evening arrives. It still glows. Just long enough to be seen. Just long enough to matter. Then it fades again, waiting patiently for the next dusk to return. The most remote cabin lies on Still Ridge, a narrow rise of stone and grass that stretches above the surrounding valleys like a held breath. The path to reach it is long and exposed, winding through open land where wind is constant and sound carries easily. Then, without warning, the wind stops. The change happens in an instant. Grass freezes mid-sway. Loose fabric hangs motionless. Even distant sounds vanish, leaving a silence so complete it feels physical. The quiet presses inward, filling every space where noise should be. Still Ridge earned its name long before the cabin was built. Early survey notes described the ridge as unusually calm, a place where weather seemed to hesitate. Settlers believed the stillness was a gift, a refuge from harsh winds that battered the lower slopes. When the cabin was constructed, it was placed carefully at the highest point, where the view was endless and the air felt clean. Heavy timbers anchor it to the ground. Stone supports brace the foundation. Everything about the structure suggests permanence, as if it were meant to endure long stretches of isolation without complaint. From the porch, the land falls away on all sides, a panorama of hills and forest that feels far removed from the rest of the world. During the day, Still Ridge feels peaceful. Light moves slowly across the ground. Shadows remain sharp and unmoving. The quiet calms racing thoughts. Breathing slows naturally. The body responds as if it has reached a place where nothing is required of it. The effect deepens with time. After an hour, standing feels less important. The idea of sitting becomes appealing, not out of fatigue, but comfort. The ground looks inviting, softened by short grass and warmed by sunlight that does not shift. Those who sit often lose track of time. Minutes stretch unnoticed. The sky seems fixed in place. The cabin casts the same shadow far longer than it should. The stillness removes urgency, making movement feel unnecessary. As evening approaches, the quiet grows heavier. The ridge absorbs the last of the dia's warmth. The air cools without breeze. Even insects fall silent. The world narrows to the cabin, the grass, and the vast open sky above. This is when the urge appears. A simple thought at first, almost reasonable. To lie down for a moment. To rest and enjoy the calm. The idea carries no danger, no fear. It feels logical, like a natural next step. Those who resist describe the urge returning repeatedly. Each time stronger than before. The body feels weighted, gently pressed toward the ground. Knees weaken. Balance shifts subtly, encouraging stillness. The grass feels perfectly shaped to support them. The ground seems to rise slightly, meeting their weight rather than resisting it. Breathing becomes slow and even. Thoughts fade into soft impressions rather than words. The desire to stand again feels distant. Not forgotten, but unnecessary. Movement feels like effort without purpose. The stillness offers completion, as if everything that needed to happen already has. Search records connected to Still Ridge are sparse but troubling. Hikers reported missing near the area. Equipment was found neatly placed. No signs of struggle. No indication of confusion or distress. Those recovered were discovered lying in the grass, positioned as if resting, faces calm, hands relaxed. Local knowledge speaks of the ridge with quiet respect. People say the land learned how to hold stillness too well. That over time, the absence of wind shaped more than weather. According to these stories, Still Ridge does not pull people down. It simply removes the reasons to get back up. Researchers have attempted to explain the phenomenon. Measurements show normal air composition. No harmful gases. No significant magnetic anomalies. Temperature variations are mild. None of it explains the overwhelming urge to rest that visitors describe. What stands out is consistency. Nearly everyone who stays too long reports the same progression. Relief. Calm. Heaviness. The desire to lie down. The sequence rarely varies. Those who leave early often do so with effort. They describe a strong resistance to movement, like walking against deep water. Each step away from the cabin feels harder than the last. Once beyond a certain distance, the wind returns suddenly, rushing back with enough force to stagger those unprepared. Sound floods in all at once. Birds. Insects. The distant hum of the world below. Many stop at this point, turning back to look at the ridge in disbelief, unsure how silence so complete could exist only moments ago. The cabin remains untouched. Supplies left inside stay undisturbed. Dust settles slowly in the still air. The structure shows little sign of decay, preserved by the lack of wind and weather. It waits quietly, a shelter that offers safety from storms but not from stillness. Those who camp near the ridge often leave before dawn. Sleep there is deep but unsettling. Dreams are vivid and slow, filled with endless fields and unmoving skies. Waking feels difficult, as if the body resists returning to motion. By morning, the ridge appears harmless again. Light reveals familiar contours. The grass looks ordinary. The cabin stands solid and unremarkable. The urge to lie down fades with the return of breeze and sound. Yet the memory remains. Visitors carry it with them long after leaving. A recollection of perfect quiet. Of rest so complete it felt final. Some describe longing to return, though they know they should not. Still Ridge is not marked by signs or fences. Nothing warns travelers of what waits there. The land does not announce itself. It simply becomes still when someone arrives, offering silence that feels like an answer to questions never asked. Those who pass through quickly may feel nothing unusual. Those who stay too long discover how persuasive stillness can be. The danger is not force or fear. It is the gentle suggestion that nothing more needs to be done. That lying down is enough. And in a place where wind and sound disappear completely, that suggestion can feel so right, so complete, that waking up again no longer feels necessary at all. You have now climbed through 20 haunted Appalachian Ridge cabins in Kentucky. Places shaped by solitude, survival, and silent tragedy. Where the mountains listened. And the forest never forgot. These cabins may seem peaceful in daylight. Simple. Quiet. But when night falls, the ridges awaken. The wind carries memories. And the past moves freely between the trees. If you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachian Mountains, respect the land. Do not follow voices you cannot see. And never assume an empty cabin is truly empty. Thank you for spending this haunting journey with me. Slow your breathing. Let the forest fade from your thoughts. And if you hear a knock somewhere nearby tonight, remember. Some doors should never be opened. Until our next journey into the darkness, stay safe.